Since making it last week, I have been obsessed with my Wizards Tower. So many things went right with this build that I couldn't help but break it down this week and think about what went right here in direct comparison to the very first Wizards Tower that I ever made, this one here, and we can get a little bit of head-to-head direct comparison. So, let's jump into it. Welcome to the channel, everybody. My name is Garmin. This, of course, is the Storycraft Society, and this week we're going to be breaking down the difference between two very important Wizards Towers. This one, of course, which I made last week that I dubbed the Queen's Tower, and then, of course, this one, which is my very first Wizards Tower ever. Now, a little bit of background. I made this one a long time ago for one of my games. I needed a Wizard's Cloud Castle to have crashed into a mountainside, and I needed my heroes to find it and investigate it. So I made this piece, and for it being my very first attempt at making something this large and making something this towerous, if that's a word, I think I did a really good job. But when you compare that directly, apples to apples, with the tower that I just finished last week, they're not even in the same ballpark for me of what I'm looking for in a build like this. So I figured we could take some time this week and I could kind of go back and forth and explain what went really well with this and what I could have done a long time ago with this that would have made it closer to this. I think improvements could be made. We'll go with that. So, with that said, let's jump into it. Okay, so the first thing that I want to talk about between these two builds is scale. I have promised that I'm going to end up making a dedicated video to this in the future, and I definitely still want to do that. I think this topic deserves its own video 100%, but I'm just going to quickly go over the things between these two that really make a difference. So let me grab a mini real quick. In Dungeons and Dragons, at least, we know that our scale is a 1 inch by 1 inch block counts as 5 feet. Now this is a really important thing to consider and remember when it comes to building your buildings, because that is going to directly apply to our miniatures and their size. In this build, even though I built it so that it felt larger than life, it ends up actually feeling cartoonish because the width here, I'm gonna grab a ruler. Maybe I'm gonna grab a ruler. I found it, but I realized I could have just used the markings on my crafting mat. Okay, so the bottom of this piece is 10 inches across. That means that this is a 50-foot base bottom of a tower. That's really big. Whereas this one over here is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5-ish, 5.5, which ends up being 25 or 30 feet, which is much more reasonable for the scale of the buildings. It also has another effect. When you have this big kind of bloated, cartoony looking style, it pulls away from the fact that it doesn't really look like a fantasy building as much as it looks like a... I keep coming back to the word cartoon, but that's really the case. And there's a lot of really fantastic crafters on YouTube who make buildings in this style, this bigger, expanded kind of balloon blown up style. And I'm not saying that it's not awesome. I'm just saying for my taste and for what I am going for when I am building a build like this, I want something that has a little bit more of that thin, whimsical fantasy look. And getting your scale right is one way that really helps you to do that. Another quick little tag that I'm going to add to this real fast before we move on to the next point is also in the scale of the windows and doors. I ended up making these myself, and they ended up so much larger. They're almost like as high and as wide as the Mini, which is not what windows really are. Whereas the shiftinglands.com windows that I used on the build last week really fit to scale. And it makes our eye believe that it's more of a realistic thing instead of just a D&D prop. The next thing that I always love to talk about that I did in older builds that I don't do in my newer builds is I broke them up into pieces. This, as a crafter, seemed like such a good idea. I would be able to hide bits of things inside of the building. When my heroes would go inside, I would be able to pull the top off and reveal the interior of the building. It just has never worked that way for me. Now, it might be different for you in your games, and certainly other people get varied results. But for me, I never end up getting to use these interiors, and they take a whole bunch of extra time to be able to do. Not to mention, if I want to play my interiors, I can just pull out my dungeon tiles, of which I have way too many, and then use those to set up the interiors if that's what I need. Let's talk about size of block for a minute. This is a thing that is, you know, an evolution that came with time for me. So when I made this tower a long time ago, I was still new to laying bricks. I knew that it was the right way to go, but also making something this large with this much surface area and laying that all with individual bricks, that was a daunting and big ask. When I did it, I made these 1/2 inch by 3/4 blocks. Now, they look okay. They certainly look better than if I would have carved the bricks or done something like that, but it doesn't look anywhere similar to the brickwork that was done on the Queen's Tower. And the answer for me with that is, on this tower, I made the bricks much, much, much smaller. So you get a much more intricate and detailed brick pattern. The brick pattern on this guy, where I still have the push and pull of the blocks, I still have all of the brick texture, it looks so much more flat because you don't have all of the quick nooks and crannies that the shadows can fall into and catch your eye. So definitely keeping the bricks smaller makes a huge visual difference. The final thing that I would like to talk about between these two builds that I see as a huge major difference is the variation of visual shapes. So if you look at this build, you'll notice that it is basically all horizontal blocks with just a couple of windows breaking up that surface. All of the floors of the tower are the exact same height. All of them basically culminate with the same features. So for example, there's these thin bits of foam to differentiate these two floors, exact same thin bit of foam to differentiate these two floors. All of the windows are the same sizes. All of the blocks for the crenellations are the same sizes. All of this leads to a very boring looking piece that doesn't really grab the eye and feel super exciting. Variation is where all of that is, and the magic comes in intentional and well thought out variation. Not just throwing random things onto your model, but coming up with the right way and the right places to push and pull the eye. I think that I did this absolutely exceptionally well on the Queen's Tower. It's got the vertical of the posts here. It's got the interesting shaped base that progressively gets thinner. And I'm not taking claim to any of this. All of this was using this Queen's piece to be able to get this base structure. But what it does is it just catches the eye so much more. And really that comes down to the root of why I wanted to make this video. When I looked at this tower over the last week, it kept catching my eye, it kept making me excited and made me want to talk about it. And that's why we make our pieces, because it's something that makes us proud and excited to show off. Even if you don't show it off to other people, even if you're only showing it off to yourself, you want to be proud of what you make. All these little differences come down to a culminating point of, as you make more, you will get better. And these are just simple little things that I was able to do to make the same build basically, but a few years later, use a couple of tricks up my sleeve to make it that much cooler. But with that said, that's all I have for this week. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you enjoyed it, you can leave me a like down below or a comment. Do you have a project like this? Is there something that you've made that you made a long time ago and now you've made again recently that you've blown yourself away? I would love to hear about that. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't. That goes a long way to helping out a small YouTube channel. But the #1 way that you can help a small YouTube channel out is to share this video with a friend that you think would enjoy it. But that's all I have for this week. So until next week, I'll be seeing you.